Hi everyone and welcome to Poppy Fairy, another Easily Does It tutorial. So this one is going to be exclusive to the web store and will only be available there. So this particular painting, it is a good idea to have a hairdryer ready. There are layers that you'll want to have dried off before painting on to the next section. So yeah, I'd grab one of those, or if you're not in any hurry, just leave the layers to dry in between. We're going to start off by painting in our pink background. I'm going to use a mixture of obviously white. I've got some permanent rose, and then I'm going to use very sparingly a little bit of scarlet, and I'm going to use the tiniest amount of some ultramarine so that I can create this lilac-y effect over on this side. I'm going to use a 1-inch filbert brush, and I'm going to sort of paint in a diagonal motion to give me a lovely kind of this diagonal effect. So yeah, let's get going. So I've got, oh, knocked all my paints over. I've got some white. I'm using this plastic plate today as my palette. Oh, we've gone all out of focus. There we go. So a generous portion of white, quite a generous portion of my permanent rose, and a small amount of my scarlet, and also my ultramarine. So here goes my scarlet, and then grab my ultramarine. Here we go. If you've got a purple or something like that, you can use it, but as you can see, I've given myself a tiny amount, but I'm probably going to hardly use any of that at all. I've taken my brush and I'm going to wet my brush a bit. Let's bring my water over here for a second. So start to work a bit of water into my paint. Just get it into a good consistency. Obviously, you can use the specialist sort of drying mediums and things like that. But if you're just starting out with painting, water with acrylics is fine for this. And then I'm going to take some of my pink, my permanent rose, and start to mix it in. So I want this to be quite streaky in the background. So I'm going to start painting already. Make sure you've got your paint and your water worked in well together. I'm going to grab a bit more of my pink. So particularly with the scarlet and the red tones, we don't want to kind of go too red. We want a bit of difference between this and our actual rose colour. So I'm leaving some areas a bit paler and other areas a bit darker, but I'm going to keep going in that diagonal direction. There, I'm going really dark up here in this corner. I'm going quite thick with the paint. I don't want it to dry too quickly because I want to come back and be quite subtle with the other colours that I'm going to put on. So we've got our grass at the bottom. We don't have to worry too much about finishing the bottom of the canvas nice and tidy, but we do want to make sure we've got these lovely diagonal streaks going on. There we go. I am getting quite low because obviously we don't want to leave any white gaps for our grass, but we don't have to finish that off perfectly. I'm now going to start to use some of my scarlet. I'm going to mix that in with my pink, and that will give me this nice kind of slightly warmer pink, and I can just rub this through. You really, really don't want to go too red with this, because then you won't sort of be able to tell where your fairy finishes and your background starts. If you don't have another shade of pink and you're trying to do this with creating a pink with a red, I'd actually recommend that you abandon the pink background and go for something like a very pale blue. Something like that would work really well. The reason I picked this pink background was because I wanted red. Red is generally not a great colour for wanting to go over the top of other colours, so I wanted to sort of use something that was a bit tonal to so that the red would sit quite happily over the top of it. And then just final bit, I'm going to take literally the tiniest bit of my ultramarine, create a lilac-y shade. Be really kind of sparing with adding that. So, and yeah, there we go. Just going to brush a few little bits through with my lilac. You really don't want to go too extreme, particularly with that shade. So just doing a very light touch, just pulling my brush across the top of the canvas. So that's it. Once we've got a good coverage over everything, we're going to leave that there to dry off. Once our background is fully dry, the next thing we're going to do is work with some of our green. I am going to leave a little bit of green behind with this to use later on the centre of our poppy and also on the bodice of her dress. I'm going to create 2 shades of green. I'm going to use a lighter green for this background grass, and then a slightly sort of darker, deeper one for the foreground grass and also the stem of our poppy. So for doing the grass, if you've got any of these brushes in your kit, these are all really kind of helpful for painting this. So if you have a fan brush, this is really good. So with your paint, you hold it the direction you want to go and you brush upwards, and that will give you a lovely curved kind of blade effect, blade of grass. The other one is one of these angled brushes. If you've got one of those, that's also really good for getting a nice blade of grass with, or your lining brush, which is the ones with the longer bristles. If you don't have any of those, just use your standard sort of round brush, but it just makes it that little bit easier to have one of these other brushes. So to start off with, for my paler green, I'm going to mix. I've got some light green paint. I'm going to use some white and also a little bit of yellow. And the reason that we're going to use the white in with the green and the yellow is just to give it a little bit more opacity so that the pink doesn't show up behind. So I'm just mixing this here. So the consistency of the paint is really what matters in this, or actually probably more than the type of brush that you use. You can use, so you could use like a 1/2 inch flat as well. It's hard to do because you're kind of inclined to press down quite hard with those, but if you're good at kind of controlling the amount of pressure that you use, that's a good a good brush to use, obviously using painting with the thin side. So I'm going to start off with my fan brush and show you what I mean. I've loaded this up. This particular paint is nice and I would call this almost juicy. So it's quite fluid. You are going to get with this some of the background showing through, but as you can see, you get a nice kind of blade of grass shape with this, and you can just work along like that. So I'm going to build this up in layers. I'm really not pressing down hard because I just want the very tip of my fan brush to touch the canvas. So that's how it looks starting off with a fan brush. If I can show you as well. So with a sword brush, the angled ones, it's quite a similar effect. Again, you don't want to press down too hard, but you've got a little, oh, I've got a bit of hair on there. You don't want to, you can get a nice, this is probably my favourite out of all of them. You can get a lovely point on it. The good thing about using the fan brush is it can be a little bit more unpredictable and so make your grass look a little bit more random. So if you're going for a realistic look, that's quite handy. So as these are drying and I'm going over the top of them, you can see that these are starting to kind of strengthen up. I can show you with the lining brush as well, but to be honest, they're better off just for using the stem. Or this sabre brush is good for that, so the sword brush. So starting to get some grass in. This really is just the background, so we're not too fussed about a bit of pink showing through. It's helping to create a bit of depth to our painting as well. So I'm going to pop in the stem of our flower before I put in my layer of grass. I just want to get that on out of the way and drying. So I'm going to use my slightly dark green, and I'm going to give myself a start and a stop point. Whenever you're doing any kind of a big line or anything like that, it's always just a good idea to know where you're starting and where you're heading. So I am going to pop in, so sort of roughly there. I'm going to have the, a little bit higher, the centre of my poppy. And I know I need to leave a little bit of a gap for my for where my petals are going to be, and I need my stem to come down here. So now I've got a starting and a stopping point. I can get a nice curve in. So I'm using a lining brush, just like with the grass. What is important here is the consistency of the paint. If you're trying to do this with paint that is too thick, you're really going to struggle. So I like to kind of bring this in. From one side to the other. So not a perfect line at all, but I've gone with a thinner brush so that I can correct this as I want. So now I'm going to just go round and thicken up my line so it's pretty much the same thickness all the way through. If you're feeling really confident with your line painting, then absolutely go for this in one go with a thicker brush. And you will get a better finish if you can do it in one go, but it is very hard to keep the paint consistent, the thickness, the pressure you're applying, everything like that. So that's my curved poppy stem. And I can now go back through and pop in some of my darker grass. So it's up to you. I went for a more of a sort of Viridian green down there on the original. Or you can just work your way, keep going darker and darker, and just build up more and more layers as you like. Some of these I'm doing longer than the grass that's underneath them. So I haven't gone right to the bottom because I am going to do a final sort of really much darker green. I do a few strokes and then scrape off any excess so that I keep that point that I want. So another kind of a little tweak that you can do if you want to on this is using your darker green. If you're feeling very kind of confident with your line work, you can paint up a shadow on one side, but you can leave that until after it's all dried off, or you can brush that through while it's still wet. That's up to you. I'm going to finish this up now with my Viridian green. So if you don't have that particular colour, you can create a nice sort of dark, rich green by adding one of your darker blues to some of your green paints. So ultramarine or something like that will work well. Phthalo, if you've got it. Any of those kind of darker, richer blues work well. You can add a little bit of black, although I would avoid it just because you want to keep the vibrancy of the colour rather than kind of just sort of sucking that out by adding black. So I'm making sure I cover all of the pink down at the bottom, but obviously leaving any that shows through towards the top. Doing this by building up the layers with the lighter green first, it means that this green is quite a translucent colour, so you'll find that it helps to keep a good green colour rather than you having to touch up pop on loads of layers and have to keep touching it up and stuff. You might find there's the odd bit that needs a little bit of another coat, but you've got a lovely effect there. You've created a bit of depth to your painting just by doing that. So I'm going to let this dry off and then go on to our poppy and our fairy. The next step that I'm going to do once this is all dried off is actually put in where my flower and my fairy are going to go. Absolutely use a pencil to plan this out if you want to. Unfortunately, it never shows up on screen, so I kind of have to just go for it. So the lines I'm about to do in my red paint, do feel free to do with a pencil. And first thing I'm going to do is mark in where my poppy is going to go so that I've then got an idea of the area that's left for my fairy. our poppy is going to be made up of these 4 petals. And what you might find that is a little bit of a help is to actually pop in your lines that your petals are going to follow. So you want them all to be kind of roughly the same size to start off with, and then we'll amend those because you've got a thing called foreshortening. So things that are sort of coming out towards you get a bit squashed, and it just is something to kind of start to have a think about. So I'm going to basically pop in my very rough petals to start off with. I'm not putting any of the kind of shape of the edges of the petals, these bits. I'm just getting the actual placement of the petals to start off with. So this top one we're going to have curving in. I've gone a little bit lower with my center than in my original, so I don't lose so much of my poppy off the side. This left hand poppy is going to be lovely, like wide. And then this bottom one again is going to curve over towards the left hand side of the canvas. So this is a very simplified version of what we want, and then we can build on there. So I've got this kind of a bit of a bump shape going on this petal there. This one again, I've got these 3 bumps, so I'm going to look at 1, 2, and then I'm going to bring this petal out up here to reshape that. This bottom one we only have 2, so I'm going to pop that in outside, and then we go back to 3 again on the left hand petal. So I'm going to go big in the middle and then round. Poppies have these beautiful big round petals to them. Okay, that is the placement of my flower kind of popped in. So if you're doing that with pencil, you can get that in. And then we're going to look at our fairy. So we've obviously got this big poppy skirt. She's very stylized, so she's got this very long, exaggerated body in like contrast to the shape of the skirt. And then we've got these butterfly wings. So we're going to sort of stick man her to start off with. We also need to think about where her arms are going to go. And again, so use a pencil if you're sort of not feeling overly confident. When you're drawing people, it's always a good idea to start off with the head. So first thing I'm going to do is just give myself a little bit of an oval. I need to leave a little bit of a gap because obviously we've got her arms holding her on. She's kind of swinging, so I'm going to pop in a little bit of a line to give me a bit of a guide for her spine. So her arms, basically I'm going to put a little line across and then her arms are going to swing up. So I'm going to make my left hand one straight. So that's left hand facing, or her right arm. And then I want this other one, I'm going to just put a little bit of a bend in it. So I'm not putting the hands in at the moment. Those will be added later on. Just so she hasn't got one sort of arm much, much longer than the other, which she kind of has a bit in the original, but this I've angled this stem slightly differently. So, and then I'm going to leave her long body. I'm going to put in her waist about there, and then from that I need to plan out roughly where her skirt is going to be. So I want to follow that line that I did before. And again, I'm just going to give myself my real basic petal shapes to start off with. I've obviously done longer grass as well this time. So get my basic petal shape in, and also on this side. So that is very basic guide to the shapes. I'm not going to worry so much about her legs at the moment because we can pop those in where we've got space. And now, just like with the poppy, oh, I picked up a bit of green. Just like with the poppy itself, let me give this brush a good clean. So if you do something like that, don't be tempted to start sort of smearing it around. It's better to take it off. So I just did a thing called tonking there, where you take off any excess paint. And I'm going to put in my bumps for my petals. I need to remember to leave enough gap for her wings. So I'm going to bring that in and then give a little bit of a curve there. So this is my middle petal. Again, I've got 3 little bumps that I'm going to put like that. And then finally, we've got this right hand petal over here. My guide is a lot smaller at the moment than I want it to be, so there we go. Have a look, check that they're kind of, you know, roughly similar shapes, and you haven't got one sort of thin one and others that are much thicker. And then we want to have a look at her petals. Her wings, should I say. So butterflies have these kind of split wings with a large front and a small back wing. And we want them to attach basically along her spine. So I need to leave kind of room for arms and flowers and things like that. So I'm going to position this so that it fills the space between the poppy. And you can go straight in with your, again, we've got these 3 bumps like we did on the flowers, or you can get the real basic shape in, and then we've got this teardrop shape underneath. So again, I'm going to do another teardrop. We need to leave it space for her body. And then we're going to try and echo the wing shape on that we did on the other side. So you might find it helpful either with your fingers or with another brush to just kind of give yourself a bit of a guide and work out roughly where you want the tip of that wing to go. So I'm going to go round behind our stem as well. Okay, that is most of the planning done. What I'm actually going to do is block most of this in, actually using a more of a dark red. So to create a dark red, you just use your normal bright red if you don't have one, that is, and then just like with where we were mixing the lilac up for the sky, just add the tiniest bit of an ultramarine blue, so one of your dark blues, to it. Really small amount, can't stress that enough. You really want a very small subtle amount, otherwise you'll just turn it into purple straight away. The reason that I'm going to go with the dark red is, or deep red, whichever you've got, is it gives us a nice flat colour to build up from. So I've got a good deep red colour. So yeah, you can use any of your bright primary reds and add a very small amount of your ultramarine blue or one of your dark blues to it to create a good dark red. You won't have the kind of pureness of the colour of getting a deep red or a dark red shade, but you'll get a good version of it. And we will be brightening it up with some highlights as we go. So this is almost like the shadow colour that we're going to start off with. And then we brighten it as we go along. The other thing that's quite good with this, if you've drawn in with pencil, is by using the darker red. If your brush is picking up the graphite from your pencil and making your colour sludgy, it won't show up quite so much with a darker or deeper red. You will find that your green stem is going to sort of show through to start off with, but as I said, we're going to build up with layers, so don't panic about that at the moment. If ever you need to cover anything in painting, it's always better to cover it in layers of paint, like layers of thin paint, rather than to try and splodge a big load of thick paint over the top. Okay, I'm now going to go over her skirt. Where possible, obviously you can't do it on all of it, I'm trying to follow the direction that the veins in the petals would grow. So mainly where I'm going around the edges and then brushing in rather than kind of across. So you get a nice, any textures that you do get in your paint will be kind of following the lines in the flowers. And then finally, I'm going to fill in her wings. You don't have to worry massively about the edges of this because we're going to go round in our black. And you might find that for the sort of the real points of this, that you want to go over them with a smaller brush. So I know it's another brush to wash up, but don't be afraid to do that rather than struggling to get through with a bigger brush. So there we go. I have lost one of the arms while doing that, but it's not the end of the world. I've got it in so I can remember where it is when I need it later. And I'm just going to go over our last little lower bit of the wing here with a smaller brush. It's much harder to get a flat finish with a smaller brush, so it is always a much better idea to go with a bigger brush if you can. Okay, so I'm just going to go around like that. Any bits that need a little bit of tidying up with my small brush. And again, it's another case of having to let that dry off. Once you've done that, we're going to come back with, you can either use, if you've got a really pale sort of orangey red, anything like that, that will work really well for the next stage. It's up to you if you wanted to give that a second coat, just really kind of even it up, or it's not essential at all. I'm gonna switch over now. I've just got a nice kind of round brush. I'm going to use my brighter red. So this was a scarlet, and I'm going to start to put in some highlights. So just a few little brush strokes, keep it quite simple. So have some petals that have more highlights on than others. You can do an orange as well. So what I'm going to do on some of these is have more of the scarlet than others, and then also have a more of a kind of vermilion or orangey tone highlight. So the thing to kind of think about is that the brighter, more vibrant colours, warmer colours will come towards you, and the cooler, darker colours will recede, they'll move away from you. So things that you want to, if you want to create a bit of shape and depth to your poppy, use your brighter, warmer colours closer on the things that you want to look like they're closer. I'm going to pop in some strokes into the centre of her wings as well. And just like with the poppy itself, I'm going to pop some sort of brighter orange right in the middle. You might find that this red really starts to disappear when it dries into your darker red. You do find that with a lot of the sort of similar tones that actually, once they dry, they do start to disappear a bit. So don't be afraid to do more coats if you feel like you need it. I do tend to find with doing, I did the oil painting poppies last night, and the camera isn't great at picking up the contrasting tones on these. So I'm going to come back, I think, with a bit more of a orangey tone so that it shows up on the camera better. So I'm going to try it with my vermilion and see if that helps. Although there's not a massive difference, let's add some more yellow. See if that helps to make it show up on camera. It's one of those things where I paint these. Yeah, that's a little bit better. I paint these and they look absolutely fine in real life, but then come to actual filming and you lose some of the details and the subtleties. So I'm really just putting very simple, there's no shading, they're just strokes. Which is quite a nice, nice sort of free painty effect to them. So this is showing up much better on screen than using the scarlet colour. You can definitely use the scarlet yourself. You build it up in layers if you want a subtle change between them, but if not, an orange will do a good job. And then I'm probably going to do one more slightly more yellowy orange over the top of this in some areas for a highlight. So I'm just adding some of my, I kept some of my yellow from my grass earlier. You can also add a little spot of white, not much, but that will just help to make it sit. So I've made a kind of a tangerine-y colour, and I can, yeah, you can see that's just showing up a little bit better as well on the screen. So I would definitely go for an orange rather than a tangerine. This is showing up. This is just so it shows up on the camera, as opposed to it's a bit too contrasty, I think, personally, in real life. So I'm not going to use masses of it. Use it at the very inside of my wings. Like that. Yeah, that's looking better. I've got my kind of contrast, which is what I was looking for. I'm then going to create a darker red. You really don't want to go too dark. You don't want to lose the contrast between the dark red and the black that you're going to use on it. So yeah, I'm going to grab some of my dark red. If you've already mixed some, all you're going to do is add a little bit more of your ultramarine and just make it that little bit darker. So it will go a little bit more purpley, but shadows, when you're painting, shadows are generally sort of a cooler tone. It's not just a case of adding black to them. You often add a bit of black and a bit of blue or something like that. So so let's do a little tester, see if that, no, not dark enough to show up on screen. So I've gone for a real kind of burgundy there. Yeah, that's showing up a bit better. So definitely don't want to make this so dark that you won't be able to see the difference between the black that you're going to add on in a bit. Those nice black lines that poppies have. We're going to go right up to the green again with our black lines, so we don't go in around there, but it doesn't have to be perfect at all. So we've got that darker area that we want, and then we can look at what we want in the way of shadows and edges of flowers and things like that. I'm going to avoid putting any of that darker red onto her wings and just keep it for the petals on her skirt. So you can go around the edges, create some sort of folds and sort of little kind of ruffly bits in the petals here. You can go around, create shadows on some of the petals. Poppies have these beautiful, very almost paper-like petals, so you can use your brush strokes to create those lines. Once I've done that, I'm going to again, let it all dry off, and then I'm going to pop her basic flesh tone in and then start to work on some of the black, so her flesh tone's got time to dry. For that, I'm going to use some white. Depends what kind of a flesh tone you want, obviously. So I've got very pale with this particular fairy because I wanted her to be a real contrast against the rest of the painting, and also because I've given her black hair. So I'm going to use some white. I'm going to use a little amount of my kind of orangey red colour. It really is a tiny amount, so don't get sort of tempted to go too far with it. And then you can either use some of your dark red, or if you've got a little bit of a brown colour. Any of those will do. I definitely wanted her to be more of a pinky kind of tone. And I'm going to use my small brush. I'm going to start off by popping in her face shape. So that oval that we painted earlier on, I'm going to fill all of that in. She's almost as pale as me. That's saying something. So I'm just using a small round brush. Get the oval of her face in. I'm going to bring a line down from the oval that's going to be her neck. And then I'm going to go and just slightly reshape the bottom. I'm going to angle that to an ever so slight point so that I've basically created a bit of a chin shape to her. We've then got out her shoulders that we popped in earlier. So I'm going to go back over that cross. And then from that cross line, we can go up to her arms. So do a first initial line all the way up. I like her to kind of be a bit gangly and thin. So I'm going to then pop in. So I angled this one slightly, gave her a little bend in the arm, like that. Once you've got those and you're happy, I'm going to just take her little sort of the top of her chest area down. We've obviously got a bodice and things like that to put on her. And then once we've got that and we're happy with it, I'm just going to ever so slightly, it's a really subtle change, is thicken up her arms up near the chest area. I'm going to keep a little bit of this flesh tone because what I actually want to do is put her hands in at the end. So you might have gone over your stem a little bit. We can come back in and touch that up. But you don't want to kind of lose her. You want her arms to go behind and then her hands to kind of pop over. So up here where I'm happy with it, I can do that now. So I've gone up to the edge of the stem. If you go over that, just touch that up with a little bit of green. And then I'm just going to put a little kind of oval. That's going to be her hand. The same with this one. So if you need to go back over your stem to sort of tweak it, then do that before you put the hand on. So yeah, save a little bit of that back if you need to. If you don't, then and you're happy with your stem, just crack on. That's no problem. So she's a bit disjointed at the moment. I'm going to make sure that her skirt is totally dry before I start to do the next bits, but we're going to use black for this next bit, and also we're going to be using some green. So it's up to you if you want to go over the green next and then do the black, but personally I would do the black next and then the green at the end. All depends on how steady your hand is. So I'm going to use another small sort of round brush. I'm going to add a little bit of water to my black. and I'm going to just start to put in some of the black lines. So I'm going to go right up around my green that I put in at the beginning, and then I'm going to take these lines up into the petals. So these are not shadows like your dark red. These are the actual lines that you get on the centers of poppies. So you don't have to worry about kind of sticking to inside the areas that you've done. There we go. And what you tend to find with poppies is the black center follows the overall shape of the petals. So they're longer in the middle and they kind of fade out a bit towards the sides. So on the right hand and the left hand petal, you want to have shorter lines than you're going to have on the ones that's pointing up and down, because of the foreshortening that we were talking about earlier. And I'm just following the curve that the petals are going in. So I think I could do with making that one a little bit longer. So I've got a nice solid black around my green. I'm going to go back over that anyway, but that's that done. I'm going to repeat that on her skirt down here. So it's still the same rules apply, where the lines are longer in the middle of the petal and then get shorter as they come outwards. And then final one. Add a little bit more water. There. Yeah, I'm really happy with that so far. So for her feet, I'm going to pop those in. So I've put these, they're almost meant to be like the little stamen bits on the insides of her. Her legs are kind of meant to echo that. So I'm going to put in 2 thin lines that go in between that, the sort of the bits, the edges of the petals, and then 2 kind of bigger feet shape like that. And then I'll come back once those have dried off a bit and put some pom-poms on them. So for doing her butterfly wings, obviously she's got black hair that is going to go across some black sections of our wings. So don't overcomplicate that and kind of keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch over to a slightly finer brush. You know how it is when you have favourite brushes for doing favourite things. And I'm going to start off by going around the outside of my wing shape. Butterfly wings are actually quite complex to get kind of looking realistic with all the veins. They're a very precise kind of a shape, and a very you've got to get the angles really right and get it perfectly mirrored. So yeah, not an easy thing to do to get good butterfly wings. So I'm just starting to thicken up the outside. The outside parts of our butterfly wings are thicker. And then you go through with, so we put in our first narrower lines coming in from, you can see the points where the sort of scallop is. Bring those in. And then from that, you take in other lines. So I'm not going to put too much detail in between her arm and her head, because that's where her hair will be. I'm going to come down to create almost like a little leaf shape, and then off of that leaf shape you would have lines kind of fanning off. So that's starting to give you a bit of a butterfly shape, and then you just repeat that. It's exactly the same down the bottom, so it's thinner as it comes in towards the body, and the black is thicker outside. I'm going to pop in that leaf shape in the middle, and then you do the lines radiating out from it. And then it's a case of repeating it on the other side. And trying to get them to look as close as possible to mirror images. So like I said, it's not the end of the world if you go over any of your green. You can just touch that up when you finish. It all depends on how steady your hand is and how good you are at doing edges and things like that. So these areas that are furthest away from the body are thicker. I'm going to do this outside bit as well. And then come in with my leaf shape. As you can see, where we've done that work with the different shades inside the wings, that once you get that black over the top, it looks really amazing. So another leaf shape coming up. We're going to lose part of that behind her arm, and we can just take our lines that radiate out from that. I think I need to thicken that up a bit to make it look a bit more even. There we go. And then just some nice thin lines that are gonna, very simplified way of radiating outwards. I'm going to pop in her hair and the top of her bodice next. We've got details to go on to those, so it'll be good to get those drying. So I've created two plaits, and her hairdo is kind of got this little curl coming in from one side. I've got a little bit more room on this one because I've taken her arm out to the side a bit more. So I'm pretty much gonna paint a bit of a helmet on her to start off with, just going round the outside. It's very much a kind of kids cartoon type version of hair to start off with. I think we all started off by doing sausage hair. I'm then I've got that pinched in point to her chin, and I want to really emphasize that, so I'm going to echo that coming up. So no fringe for my one. If you want to pop a fringe on her, then yours you can do. And then I'm going to take this curl in. So the point of your hair on the face, if you want to give her a side parting, you just move that pointed area to one side more or the other. And then I'm just gonna kind of play with this until I get her how I want her. I can bring I'm going to bring the hair down right to her neck on one side, and I'm going to widen it up a little bit there. So you can leave her with short hair if you want. If you want to give her plaits, so obviously she's swinging and we're trying to give her a bit of momentum. So basically what I do for plaits, very simple way, is to just load up my brush and then just kind of press down and give it these kind of like bumps, basically. So this paintbrush is probably a little bit thin for doing that, but you can see roughly what I mean. So you really want to just emphasize, this is like painting in silhouette, you emphasize the things that make it obvious. I'm going to go back to looking at her face here. So I've given her two quite strong eyebrows that are just going to come in from her hair. Like this. Below that, I'm going to do two very simplified eyes. So you can leave these as spots if you want, or you can put the eyelashes on as well. I'm going to really super simplify the eyelashes rather than trying to paint individual ones over the top. So I'm just going to pop in a line. If you've got a fine brush and you've got a steady hand, you can put a little bit of a kind of like a flick eyeliner on there. And I'm going to give her a little bit of shading, but for now I'm just going to use some of my really dark red and pop in her mouth down here. So she's got very full, luscious lips. So I'm basically going to paint a bit of a diamond shape down here. So it's quite diamond on its side in the middle of her face. And then from that, I'm going to take it out and just round it a little bit. We can put a little bit more detail in later on. I think she's got like Brat's lips, isn't she? Okay, I'm going to switch back to my black now. And we want this long kind of willowy body. So I'm going to start off by using that guideline that we did at the beginning for her kind of, that was her spine, and just give a long narrow bodice on her skirt. Coming down to quite a sort of a really narrow point on the waist. And then give your brush a clean out. Go back to your green, and we want our green to kind of blend into our black. So I'm going to start off by doing the kind of like leaf shapes that you get on the underneath. So these would have been kind of like when it was a bud, holding all the petals in to protect them. These are those. So I've got my little leaf shape here. I'm going to pop 3 of those on. So take time to get a nice point on. They would sit, if you're looking at them directly, they do sit sort of just overlapping, so the edge of the petal sticking out a little bit. And then you can take your green up into your black. Like that. So I'm going to make those a little bit thicker, I think, actually. A little bit fatter. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to leave those to dry off now. Actually, while I've got my green on my brush, once your black up here has dried off nicely, you can go back in and re-put in the centre of your poppy. You can also come and just tidy up any little loose edges or wobbles that you need. There. I'm going to get this all dried off and then come back with my white and do my last few touches, and also her shadows on her face. So once that's all dried off, what I'm going to do actually next before I do the white is do some shadows on her face and her body. I'm going to leave her arms as they are, but I do want to create a little bit of shadow on her. So I'm going to use the same pink tone that I used before. I'm just going to add a little bit more of my dark red to it. You can also add a very tiny amount of your of like a scarlet or an orange tone. It's very subtle, the change, so don't be tempted to add masses and masses. You just want to add a little tiny bit. Use a really small brush, and I'm just going to pop in a little bit of a nose. Not sure that's actually dark enough to show up on camera. Let me add a little bit more. So don't go too dark. I always have to go a bit darker than I would like so that it shows up on camera. So I'm just going to do a little, there we go, mark under her nose, above her eyes. So if you've gone a bit thick with her eyelashes, this is a good point to give her. I'm going to go under her chin and onto her neck, and pop a little bit on her shoulder as well. You want to. So she's got a little bit of shadow there. And then again, with your tiniest brush, I'm going to grab a little bit of white, like the tiniest amount you can get on my brush, and a little highlight on each eye. You can do a little highlight on her nose if you want, and also, if you want to, some highlights on her lips. So then we go with keeping with the white. We're going to start to put in some of the highlights. So she's got a little Tinkerbell type pom-poms on her feet, and just by adding these little spots of white, it really brings to life your painting. I'm going to start to dab some. So I know technically they're not white, but the little clusters that you get around the central part of your poppy, they just bring out a really kind of great contrast in all the colours by using the white for this part here. You can put some highlights on your petals if you want to, but I would avoid putting too much because it kind of takes away from the contrast of the other things. So in the black section of our butterfly wings, I'm going to put these spots. They do follow the kind of the size of the that gap that you've got there. So the narrower it is, the smaller they get. I'm going to remember to leave myself a bit of room for the plaits going across, and I'm also going to put a few down on that lower wing there. And then I'm going to repeat that on the other side. So where the black is thicker, I'm going to do larger dots. And when it goes thinner, I go smaller again. Don't have to worry about the hair with this one because it's all swinging over to the other side. And then some, I don't have as many down on that lower bit there. And then finally, I did some highlights on her bodice. So I used lines here. You could do dots or anything you like along there. I did some lines coming up on her bodice, some dots across the top. And then what I have done, which I'm not sure if it shows up on the camera or not, I've actually put a white cross that she's wearing as a necklace. So just because this week we've been, all our poppy themes have been obviously because of Remembrance Sunday, so just keeping along with the theme. You can pop some white highlights on her hands and things like that, on her forehead. You can give her a little parting as well. You could pop some clips in her hair or things like that. And then, yeah, just you can pop a few, and your lightest bits, a few just little white highlights. And there we have her. So obviously you can see I can paint exactly the same painting twice and they look, our fairies look very different. But there we go. As always, I really hope you've enjoyed the session. I hope you will be brave enough to share how you got on the Artists Hangout, because we always love to see, and always, you know, want to kind of help if you need any assistance with anything. So have a lovely rest of your week, and hopefully I will see you again at one of our sessions.